We're so grateful to have you with us today for the latest installment of ADL's Fighting Hate from Home series. For today's call, we're happy to be following up on last week's webinar with a timely update on how to use new Zoom tools for safer meetings. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the agenda for the call. We're going to start with a few words from ADL's CEO and National Director, Jonathan Greenblatt. And after that, we'll hear from ADL's VP of the Center on Extremism, Oren Siegel, who will provide a little more context for our call and share some of the data that ADL has been tracking over the past few weeks. We'll then have Dave Sifry, ADL's VP of the Center of Technology and Society, introduce Oded Gal, Zoom's Chief Product Officer, who can talk us through the new updates that Zoom has rolled out to promote safe video conferencing for your family, your organization, or your business, before we get to our ample time for question and answers. And with that, I turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Deb. I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today on the webinar. And I'm particularly grateful for Oded Gal from Zoom joining us. So as many of you know, the ADL, our mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice, fair treatment to all. And as the oldest anti-hate organization in the world, we've been very focused at the intersection of innovation and intolerance. We opened our center in Silicon Valley in 2017, and we work on a daily basis with the biggest tech companies in the world to fight anti-Semitism and bigotry on their platforms. And I'm particularly proud of the interaction we've had over the last few months with Zoom. So we were introduced to Zoom early on by one of their investors. We've been an active user of the product, and as we identified this very troubling pattern of individuals interrupting Zoom sessions, otherwise known as Zoombombing, and started to see that technique being adopted by extremists, anti-Semites, and other racists, we reached out to Zoom and have had a very fruitful dialogue. After issuing one of the earliest analyses of Zoombombing out there, which the author, Oren Siegel, will be speaking in just a moment, we started a hands-on dialogue with the company. The results of that are not only the product improvements that Zoom pushed out last week, but Oded's participation on our webinar today. The work we do, I think, has never been more important, even as everyone in our community is dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. Hate hasn't stopped. Anti-Semitism, racism against Asian Americans and immigrants. Our work now is more relevant than ever. And we can only do this because of A, the collaboration of partners like Zoom, but B, the support of people like you. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being focused and joining us in this work to fight hate for good. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Sifry, the director of our Center for Technology and Society in Silicon Valley. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Actually, I think one of the first things that we're going to be talking about today, because we really want to get into the meat of things, is to talk about what is this whole phenomenon that we're talking about, which has been dubbed Zoom bombing, but it's not just happening only on Zoom. This idea that, video teleconferencing hijacking that's occurring is something that's happening on all of these different platforms as we've now working from home. But to give us a quick overview of what we've seen and how these disruptions have really affected a lot of people in marginalized communities, as well as students and worshipers of all stripes and sizes. Oren Siegel, who is our VP for the Center on Extremism, is going to open up and give us a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll get right to the heart of talking with Oded.
Thanks so much, Dave. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody again today. I want to just echo sentiments from the entire ADL about hoping that everybody's dealing with the day-to-day as best as possible, and that everybody and their families are staying safe during this challenging time. So as this pandemic continues to impact our lives, it impacts our communities, our sense of security and safety, both in the real world and online, are being tested. And it's during these times of uncertainty and anxiety that it's even more important for us to track and combat this hatred, whether it comes from, trolls or pranksters, whether it comes from more coherent sort of extremists and their movements. Hate and its purveyors never miss an opportunity to exploit a crisis and to spread their fear and to move forward their agenda. That's why discussions like this are so critical and so central to what I know ADL is doing every day, especially as we're in a time where connecting with friends and family and community online is really more precious than it's ever been. And so for us, it's really important to, understand the root causes, if you will, of what we're seeing. And so, one of the manifestations of hate, the significant manifestations of hate during this pandemic has been the disruption of virtual meetings with graphic content, with threats, with messages that feature a hatred of all kinds. But there's sort of two main buckets that I would put what we're seeing in. And I will note that we've gotten over 100 reports of this sort of activity at ADL just in the past couple of weeks. But the first bucket is more of targets of opportunity, which means that they're not necessarily, targeted because somebody is specifically looking to threaten or impact, say, a community, a minority community, but because these are public events where people want to make sure that they're able to amplify their message, disrupt, record and amplify, sometimes as a lark. And so we've seen this at schools and universities, local government meetings, community organizations. And what I mean by that is like at a school, there was a high school class in Miami, in Florida, where about a dozen people or so entered a Zoom meeting and started blaring music. They started using profanities and showing pornographic images. And, in that case, I think the teacher immediately stopped that call. So in that sort of case, it's about disruption. It's about, not necessarily using hateful language, but trying to leverage, a community or a group of people to disrupt an event. We've seen this with local government meetings as well. A commission meeting in Michigan, for example, was disrupted also by profanities, sexually explicit content, etc. Now, in some cases, racial epithets, hatred, vile sort of hate-based imagery is also used, but the targets are not specifically being targeted the way that we see in other situations, whether it's Jewish community, Muslim community, Asian community, a Black student group, the LGBT community. That's where we're sort of seeing people doubling down and specifically targeting those groups for a level of hatred that goes beyond mere disruption, right? And so, for example, a Shabbat service at a synagogue in Washington, D.C. recently was disrupted with somebody yelling Heil Hitler and other anti-Semitic tropes. A Black men's group at University of Texas in Austin was disrupted by somebody yelling racial slurs. We've seen Muslim community leaders get together for a call about maintaining spirituality in a time of a pandemic, which also was disrupted by slurs against their religion, etc. That is like a specific type of targeting that we're seeing. Now, some of that too is by trolls. A portion of that may be by those who are connected to extremist movements, who may be specifically doing this as part of a larger campaign. But it is important to remember there are two buckets of this type of targeting that we're seeing. Now, the coordination of this is happening essentially in two places online. The first is very mainstream platforms. So think of, the Twitters, the Instagrams, even the Reddits, where there are discussions about finding a link that is not being secured properly, where people are looking specifically in order to disrupt a meeting, irregardless of what that meeting may be. And that's very much available on many public forums. A lot of times it's kids, say in a high school, who want to disrupt a class. or otherwise, spread their hatred on a public meeting that's easy to find. In some cases, private links of specific classes may be shared where they're being leveraged online as well. But we're also seeing some of these efforts happening, these discussions in extremist spaces. So platforms that are like 4chan or 8kun, which was more like 8chan, the latest iteration of that. Telegram, VK, which is the Russian Facebook. Spaces where communities of extremists often frequent, we see that they too are having discussions about potentially engaging. Now, I will say most of that discussion has actually focused on sharing screenshots or videos of these types of disruptions that have occurred because of the propaganda value. Less of the sort of use of these spaces in order to create a larger campaign. That being said, we have seen extremists, again, actually engage in this. We identified a neo-Nazi troll who engaged in Zoombombing in particular, both in California and Massachusetts. And so whether or not the extremists are leading this effort, or whether it's the trolls, the reality that hate is the language that is being used as part of the efforts to disrupt. And somebody will not necessarily know whether it's an extremist who's behind it or a bunch of kids and trolls. The bottom line is that this platform is being disrupted for hateful purposes. And this is why we're taking it so seriously and why it's really important for people to be able to address this, which is what the point of this call is. I'm just going to conclude with this. For those who have been victimized, and I've talked to several of them over the past couple of weeks, often this comes as a complete surprise, right? They don't even understand necessarily what they're seeing on their screen. At first, it's a shout, maybe then an image, where they're trying to adjust to this new reality of communicating with people through this platform. And only after a while do they realize something is happening that is intentionally trying to disrupt. And then they realize the hate that is left behind. And so this has been a traumatizing experience for many of the folks that we have spoken to, in particular because they're trying to use these platforms to connect in ways that are more important than we've seen in a long time. And so we're going to continue to track what the extremists are doing. We're going to continue to collect the information that is reported in terms of the types of activity, the types of places that are being harassed, and continue to work with those who can help mitigate this. And so for that, I throw it back to Dave and say thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Oren. Really appreciate you giving us a really clear-eyed view of what's going on when people get Zoom bombed, when people get their meetings disrupted. So clearly, this is a really important problem, and the folks over at Zoom have been working a ton on this. Just to give a little bit of background as I introduce Oded, I understand, Oded, some very impressive numbers. That in February, you were doing about 10 million daily active users who are coming onto the platform, and that in literally 1 month, that number grew 20x to over 200 million daily active users. An impressive feat for any technology company, especially in such a short period of time. But of course, with that comes a whole bunch of these other problems. So maybe we'd love to hear from you. Tell us, especially the folks who are on the call, many of us may have been victims or targets of something like this. And also, how do we protect ourselves? Right, that there's been a number of improvements that you and the team have really been pushing out with great alacrity. So let me hand it over to you, Oded, and thank you so much for coming.
So first of all, I'd like to thank you for hosting me and kind of giving me this opportunity to share what we're doing on our side. And just to comment on what you said, what happened is not just the scale that really changed 20 times. We also have seen the usage changing from being more of a business tool for organizations to becoming something that is a household name in most places around the world, using us for their kind of across the day use cases, connecting people, And with that comes also this phenomena of people disrupting meetings, unfortunately. But we've worked with you guys and we heard loud and clear, and we actually made changes to the product, a lot of it based on your direct feedback. And I do want to share some of the things we've done. Let me basically guide you through the screens that we've changed so that people can understand how to make sure the meetings are safe and how to change the settings to support that. You just bring it up. As you can see here, these are the settings that we've built really to support those type of use cases. These are not new features, but we are kind of highlighting them in a better way from now on. And I'll show you how we do that in the product itself. But those are two features that I want to highlight. There are a lot of overall security features like password settings and the ability for the host to control when people can join the meetings only if they're on the meeting or if they have a co-host in the meeting. But I just want to highlight those two important ones. The first one is really the ability to control who can host in a meeting, in the sense that who can share in a meeting. The idea is that only you can change the settings to allow only the person who is organizing the meeting to share their screen. And that's kind of an important setting that allows that control so that no one can come and share things that are inappropriate. The second feature that is as important is the waiting room. And the waiting room is really the ability for the host teams to admit people into the meeting, in the sense that anyone that comes into the meeting will go through an interface that will put him on a waiting room or a lobby. And as long as the host doesn't go and goes and changes and makes that attendee enter into the meeting, that person cannot interrupt and cannot have any access to any of the information that is presented in the meeting itself. So really you can see here, these are the two settings, the waiting room and the screen sharing, that are important to be set to make sure that your meeting is safe. Now, one of the changes we've done is really we've made those features the default, or those settings the default, so that they're coming up for the individual pro user and the free users as the default for any meeting. If you do want to make sure that this is the case, you can see on the left, if you log into your account on the web, zoom.us, put your login name, you will see on the left the settings. And when you go to the settings, you'll be able to scroll down and find waiting room and screen sharing as those two important features. Let me go a little bit in more details. So you can see here, this is just an example of myself in a meeting where there's a person who is a guest who's trying to join the meeting. That person will see that alert that tells that person, John Smith in this case, that they need to wait to be admitted to the meeting. And you can see here that I can either admit that person and that John will come into the meeting, or I can remove that person. Now what's interesting and what's important from a security standpoint, if I remove that person, they're kind of expelled for the meeting. They cannot go back and try to join again. So that's really part of the security settings that we've made. Another really important feature that you can see here that also ADL highlighted in their blog, thank you for that, is the security icon that shows up on the toolbar right now. And that's something that requires people to update to the latest client to be able to see this icon. The idea here is these are features that relate to really managing the security while you're in the meeting. So what I spoke about before was how do you prepare for the meeting and make sure you have the right settings before the meeting. Those features are similar in that extent, but the difference is that this is something you can control while you're in the meeting. And you can see here the different features. It's important to see that the two first ones are the ability to enable the waiting group. If you didn't enable it and you decide, hey, now I want to have it on, you can change that. But there's also a stronger feature that is called lock meeting. And lock meeting actually completely locks the meeting. No one can join. You'll not even be bothered with requests to admit you into the meeting. It's just completely locked and you can feel safer in that sense. And then there are other features around being able to provide privileges to the participants. You can see here the ability to share the screen. So if you do want to change the default setting and allow participants to share the screen while you're in the meeting, you can kind of uncheck the share screen. Same for chat. And even the ability to change the name of the participant is something that you can control. The last one is also something that is really important in terms of managing the meeting. You can see here, it's basically a new view of the participant list that really is much more easy to use in the sense that it simply brings up the list of participants with one button, just one button, the remove button. And that's kind of, you can always go to the participant list and manage the participant, mute, unmute, and provide all the controls that you need. But this one is very specific to remove participants, and it makes it much more simple in that sense, where once you click on the remove participants in the here on the security icon, you will jump directly to this menu and you'll be able to just click remove. And again, this is expelling that user from the meeting and they will not be able to come back. Now, these are the features that we've introduced, and I'm really happy to answer questions around how to, further use those features or any other question around security and privacy of our product. Again, we are making the adjustment to make sure that people feel safe using our product and really want to hear feedback. One note that I want to also add is regarding the use of data centers with our product. We also announced recently that we allow our users or customers to choose which data centers they want the meetings to run on. And what we'll provide is by April 18, this will be available on the backend as part of the settings that I showed you. Any paid user will be able to go into the backend and choose which data centers they're okay using in terms of which countries the meetings will be held on. So that's a kind of another commitment that we have to make sure the privacy of our users are really kept, and we'll do whatever it takes to support that.
Oded, this is really fantastic. Thank you so much for that great explanation. Before we even get too deep into the questions, because I'm just looking at the chat and we are just getting a ton of questions, and Deb is going to be moderating that. First off, let's just make sure that everyone here understands the first thing that they should do is check for updates. So these updates that you and your team are making, you won't be able to take advantage of any of them if you don't actually upgrade the Zoom software that's running on your laptop or on your device. So the first and foremost thing that they need to do, maybe you can just have a quick explanation of how people check for updates and how they upgrade to the latest version.
Yeah, you can go to the menu at the top, and there is a menu item called check for updates. Once you do that, it will just return you a dialog that will just explain what you need to do to upgrade. By clicking on that dialog, you will start the upgrade process. It's pretty simple.
So we had a number of people who have been targets or victims of Zoom bombing. They've had their meetings disrupted. Can you give us any advice? What are the things that you recommend that they do if you're in the middle of an incident like this? what are the steps? What's the first, second, and third steps that you as a team recommend?
So first of all, right now, what you can do is try to get as much information as you can about that person that disrupted. And then also from a screen capture standpoint, if you can take a screen capture of what is actually happening, that will help us as well and provide us the ability to track that person. And we do have a URL on our website that is an interface for reporting such incidents. So we'll be able to send it on the chat later on, where you'll be able to go directly into our website, put all the information in, and send it to us. And we have like a trust team that deals with those situations. It works with authorities to really support our users. One update is in the future release that is coming this weekend. That report button will actually be added to the security menu. And you'll be able to, in addition to control all the commands, you will see send report icon or menu item that will also go directly to that dialogue that helps us capture the information about what happened in the meeting.
And that'll send logs of like who these people, how they signed in, what IP addresses or where they might have come from to Zoom, so that you can then notify the authorities.
We get the information that the user sends and fills in the form, and some information from the meeting itself. Yes.
Do you recommend that people start recording their meeting when they are an attack like this is
absolutely happening? That can serve as a great tool for us as well. If they have the meeting recorded, it will help us track that person as well. Definitely.
And I'm going to note also that there's an FBI hotline, that the FBI is taking this very seriously, and we're going to post that into the chat, the link for reporting to the FBI, as well as ADL has an incident responder as well, where you can go to www.adl.org/report-incident. We're going to put that into the chat as well, so folks can know about that in case you're involved in one of these incidents. So Oded, tell us a little bit more about the steps that you are going to be taking to continue to improve security, right? So one question that came up was, hey, is all my data going through China? What's happening with that?
So that's not happening in the sense based on our product. So before I go to specifically that item, I just want to say that on April 1st, our CEO, Eric, has made an announcement that we are going to really freeze all feature development other than security features and focus the company on security and privacy for the next 90 days. So as my team, engineering team, everybody in the company is just focused on that solely to make sure that we make the product to the level that is required with this new change that happened in the world. Now, specifically around China, as of April 19, the only way to have a China data center involved in the meeting is if the user comes into the admin and checks it on, meaning by default, there will be no connection to any data center in China. That will happen on April 18.
Excellent. All right, we have so many questions from the audience. I'm going to hand off to Deb Leipzig, and I think she's going to pick some of the best, the ones that seem to be representative of what we're seeing.
And my goodness, they are just flying in. And there's a lot of questions that I think we've covered some of, but the ones that continue to populate, I may ask you to repeat yourself because I think it probably bears repeating because these are clearly what folks are concerned about. So one of the ones that's coming up a lot are questions about those folks who are Zoom bombing. Do they have access to personal information of other Zoom users? Is the information that anyone with a Zoom account is using, is that safe?
Yes, it is safe. What they can see while joining a meeting is simply the participant in the meeting itself. And those are kind of the names of the participants. If the host is actually applying waiting room, then there is no way for those hackers to even join the meeting and see even that information. So again, back to recommendation, make sure you have all the settings in place so that those people cannot even access the meeting itself to be able to see the participant list and are completely blocked from any information of the meeting.
Thank you. That's helpful. So the new security features are causing password entry failures for folks, especially with more unsophisticated users, perhaps some of the older demographic. Is there a way for Zoom to change the error messages so that they're perhaps a little more informative about what's happening so folks can try and get in? I think in general, there's some questions around ease of use for some of the more less technically savvy users.
Yeah, we made those fixes very quickly, and we will go back and make sure we adjust and make the alerts and the dialogues more understood by everyone. So that's something we are working on. Yes.
And is it clear, is it that only the paid versions of Zoom offer the different security protections?
No, this is available also for free users. The only thing that is different is the ability to choose the data center, and that's only for paid users. But in general, free users will also be excluded of the China data center.
And is there a way to block people so folks aren't able to change their name and then come back to the meeting? Is there a way to block the user?
Well, if you expel someone, that user will not be able to join anymore.
And they'll not be able to join even if they change their name? Like, is that something with their IP address, or it's only the name?
Yes, correct. We track that.
You track the IP addresses?
Yes, yes.
That's fantastic. And is that something that you've always done, or is that in response to the problems that have been going on?
It's part of the improvement.
It is. That's fantastic. Once somebody has been blocked, is that something that sticks? So if there's a Zoom bomber who interrupts a synagogue service and then goes to a church service, is that person automatically blocked from the full Zoom platform, not just that meeting, or is it meeting specific?
No, it is meeting specific in that sense. And that's where the report button will help us. So if you do have that person and you've seen, and you even if to block that person moving forward, it will be a great process if you can go to the report button and report that person so that we can exclude that person permanently.
Got it. That's great. I think that actually bears repeating, that if this happens, you're able to report it by doing what?
So today it's on the web, where we'll send a URL where you can report that person. In a future update that is coming next week, you'll be able to do it from the meeting itself.
That's fantastic. I think that's really important. So here's a broader question more about ADL and our responses to things. So what is ADL looking ahead to? What are we thinking the future of this form of racist trolling will be? And how bad do we think it can get? And what are we preparing to do about it?
Yeah, so that's a really great question.
Great question.
So first of all, at the Center for Technology and Society, like, we are sitting at the forefront where we're talking with all of the major platform companies, the folks in the gaming world, folks on the new emerging platforms like Zoom, where, it's just been taking off like crazy. And we're constantly talking, negotiating around how do you actually do the best to encourage a strong set of policies that discourage and attenuate and mitigate hate, as well as building effective trust and safety teams that can also, that we make sure can also not marginalize the communities that they're trying to protect. And on the other side, our Center on Extremism and the work that Oren and his team are doing is, constantly working with law enforcement around, better understanding who these people are, and then when we find them, and see what they're doing, alerting law enforcement to be able to take action. Jonathan, did you have something you wanted to say there?
Yeah, I would just say that we're blessed to have terrific talent. In between the collaboration, our Center on Technology and Society and our Center on Extremism, we've got data scientists and people with PhDs in artificial intelligence working with the world's leading experts on radical, right-wing extremists and kind of radicals, anti-Semites and whatnot. So I don't think there's an organization that's got a better mix of talent. And so just as we saw the threat of Zoom bombing, months ago, as prior to that, we'd seen, as Dave just mentioned, the threat of exploitation of online games. We'll continue to identify trends and mobilize our people to respond proactively with the right policies and the right engagement with the industry and legislators to try to stop these things before they grow any further.
So I just want to point out, we also have our National Policy Council on the call, Lauren Kraft. And Lauren, maybe you can just talk a little bit about what we've been doing on the legislative side, as well as working with law enforcement around some of these new threats.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. Just briefly, we've really been focusing on how to decrease online hate and harassment from a legislative and advocacy perspective, as well as, of course, from an engineering and product perspective based on our relationships, et cetera. We, this past fall, have been engaged in an initiative called Backspace Hate, where we're looking at laws around cyber stalking and cyber harassment, doxing, and swatting. In some cases, video teleconferencing hijacking could cross the line into some of those crimes like cyber stalking and cyber harassment. But also we're considering things like interruption of religious worship and interruption of educational experiences, as well as a lot of laws on the books that relate to offenses against users of computers and computer systems. So there are state and federal laws that exist that could currently be broken, and we're working with attorneys and law enforcement to explore what that looks like in this new context, as well as looking at some of the work that we've already done around cyber stalking and cyber harassment. Because we are seeing, of course, this impact across the board, but certainly against marginalized communities, against individuals during worship and other federally protected activities.
Thank you, Lauren. I always love hearing you speak about your work. Thank you for being with us today. So Oded, another question to you. Is Zoom a safer option than Google Hangouts or any of the other video conferencing platforms?
Well, with the features that we introduced and kind of made more apparent for the users, I think we are in par with the rest of the services. What we are talking about moving forward and the features that we're adding will make us even more safe than other services out there.
That's fantastic. It's certainly a competitive market now that we're all using these services so much. We're just dependent upon them. So another question for you. The waiting room has gotten a lot of attention in the chat section. So can you talk a little bit more about that? So how are the hosts able to communicate with participants while they're in the waiting room? And can the participants communicate back? And is this a reasonable tool to be using for larger groups?
So right now, no, there is no communication between the waiting room and the meeting itself, and we do it for security reasons. We don't want to kind of mix between the two. We look into adding chat between the two in the future, but right now there is no ability to do that for security reasons. I would say the second answer for larger events, I would use the webinar product. And the webinar product doesn't need the waiting room because it's much more controlled, and there is the ability to register ahead of time, and you can only admit registered users in that sense. And also from an attendee standpoint, like this event right now, you're only a viewer, you cannot interrupt the meeting, and you can even disable the chat. So I would say for larger events, it is recommended to use the webinar product rather than the regular meeting product, and that would be more secured for those type of large scale sessions.
So great, thank you. And a follow-up to that, If you're using the waiting room feature and you're blocking screen sharing, is it still necessary to lock the meeting? There are people who are concerned about if there are folks logging on late or if they're having just connectivity issues like we spoke about earlier, maybe just some issues updating their technology and being permanently locked out if the meeting is then locked?
No, there is no real need to do that. The use case where log meeting is being mostly popular is when you have everyone, maybe it's a smaller event where you have 10 people and that's it. These are the 10 people that need to be in this meeting and no one else will join in the future. And that's where you use the log.
So if someone is Zoom bombed, there have been a variety of those instances then leaked on the internet so that folks around the world are able to see what's happened. Is there a way to prevent that?
In the sense of, I'm not following the question. Can you be more specific?
I think folks are concerned about the after effects when they're Zoom bombed, and that, someone gets on and then they brag to all their friends, oh, I disrupted an ADL webinar and I said all of these terrible things. Is there anything that we can do about that? And maybe that's also a good question for some of our legal experts about, what are we doing in terms of the laws that are around this, the hate crime laws that go with this? Is that considered a hate crime?
So at least from our standpoint, from Zoom standpoint, what we are working on is really making sure, one, we expose those features that we have and educate users how to use those features, and also allow them to report those people who are disrupting those meetings. So that's kind of what we can do on our part. I do agree, maybe there is a way also to kind of follow up on that from a legal standpoint.
Just add, Deb, that I think every situation is super fact specific. Whether or not it escalates to a level of hate crime would also have to do with how the information was being accessed, were individual targets selected based on a protected characteristic, et cetera. And that would also consider a state versus federal hate crimes laws. However, having said that, if these types of videos are being disseminated on platforms, those platforms do have the right to create their own policies to maybe take those down, or consider what it might be like if somebody's being targeted based on footage or content from video teleconferencing hijacking. So both from the policy and the legal perspective, it's fact specific, but dissemination of that should be decreased because it's already having such an impact on the individuals who are already being targeted.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that also leads into the next question, which is, what do we think that this is indicative of? Like, this is what we're seeing right now, but online hate is clearly an ongoing issue. What is it that's being done to better address this overall? Are there things we can be doing?
Is that addressed to Oded, or?
I think that's addressed to you, Dave.
Okay. So the short answer is yes, there's a ton of work that's going on to address the scourge of hate online, with everything ranging from working with all of the different platforms to have stricter policies and better measurement, as well as working with the trust and safety and content moderation teams, as well as increasing enforcement and throwing people off, right? Like, just in the same way that you would not allow somebody to walk around with a bullhorn in your restaurant or in your shop, there's a really big question here, and I think it's entirely appropriate, right? That people don't necessarily get freedom of reach, even though what they're saying is protected by the First Amendment, no question. These are commercial businesses that have policies and have terms of service.
Thank you. So again, here's another technical question. So one user posits that on another platform, there's a default setting that automatically activates the safest settings, the highest level of security, specifically for young users. Is that something that's an option with Zoom? Is there a way to click a box and activate all of the security settings or the highest level of security?
So what we've done in general is, for our EDU customers, we've made sure that the highest security is on by default. And also from that standpoint, having that menu on the front in the toolbar itself allows you, if it's not by default, you can immediately see what's on there and check it immediately. So those changes that we've made allow you to, one, for sectors that use us, that require that full security by default, we've changed on the back end. For those who are in the meeting and want to immediately change the security, that button that we have allows them to do it immediately.
Thank you. So here's an interesting one. Can you speak a bit to Zoom's transparency and how you plan to address these things moving forward, and how we share information with the public, especially as our use of these programs evolves?
Yes, happy to do that. One of the things that our CEO talked about in his announcement on April 1st is that he's running a webinar every Wednesday where he will share the progress in terms of the security and will really provide updates on fixes and things that are happening in the product and in general with the Zoom platform. So everybody is invited to join that webinar on Wednesdays or even listen to the recording.
Thank you. So here's another question for the ADL folks. Is there any tracking being done of who is experiencing the most Zoom bombing? We're certainly seeing a lot of anti-Semitism. We've talked about racism. Is there any research being done in collecting this information that's targeting exactly where we're finding it in different communities?
Yeah, I don't think that there is any entity, including Zoom, that's actually logging all the Zoom bombings. So we have information. Again, you can go to adl.org and report a Zoom bombing that you or your synagogue or JCC or school might experience. But there is no comprehensive kind of listing of all the Zoom bombings that would allow us to segment out which groups are most targeted. It's a good idea, but we simply don't have that kind of record, and I don't think any entity is collecting it at this time.
Thank you, Jonathan. And this is a phenomenon that we're seeing around the world. It's not just limited to what's happening in the United States. Is that accurate? Yeah, Jonathan, I see you nodding. Yeah. And this is a really interesting question. Are any of the new security settings making it more difficult for ASL or closed captioning language interpretation to be accessible? Or are there allowances being made for it?
Yeah, we actually are very progressed in terms of our accessibility features. We pass all the certification around that. It is possible because of the fast changes we've made that we need to go back and fix some of the accessibility capabilities to support those changes. Just be patient with us. We have a special team for that we'll go back and make sure that everything works even in accessibility mode.
Thank you so much. It's just fascinating. So similar to the question I asked you earlier about a check-all for the highest security functions, is there a plan to create a kid-friendly interface, especially now that Zoom is being used so widely with schools?
We are thinking about it, what we call in the product team a meeting template, and be able to support that kind of view that is more restricted or more applicable to certain users. And it's not just for kids, you can talk about it for different groups in our community, and even different roles in terms of if I'm a trainer, I will get this kind of template. If I'm just an attendee in a training, I will get a different template. So we are thinking about it from a design perspective, yes.
So what is it that someone should do in the moment when they are being Zoom bombed? What are the steps that they should do? Can we walk through that?
I think the first thing that they need to do is identify the person and remove them from the meeting. That's and use that new button that we have today to lock the meeting moving forward. So if that happens, just go to the security button, click remove participant, remove that person, and lock the meeting.
let me jump in here just for a moment. So at ADL, we actually came up with a blog post around steps that you should take, and it actually starts even before the meeting starts. So before you begin the meeting, making sure that you have the security defaults turned on, but also we suggest having at least one co-host, and maybe
That's
even more
idea.
depending on the size of the meeting. And what that allows for is if multiple Zoom bombers come in or are disrupting the meeting serially, it allows the co-host to be able to find them. Often you have one co-host just for the waiting room and another one to help out with dealing with any disruptions. And then our recommendation is just you first immediately start recording the meeting, because that actually starts the forensic trail. And then start kicking people off using the tools that Oded was just talking about. I mean, having that new security icon right there for the host to be able to see allows you to really get rid of disruptive miscreants, get them off as quickly as possible. And if you need to, you can also lock the meeting, which allows the meeting to settle down a bit, allows you to kick the people off and continue with the meeting as a last resort.
Thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. Have a plan, be prepared. Those are great. And for those of you who are populating the chat, we will absolutely be circulating these resources and links when we send you our follow-up email as well. So rest assured, you'll have all of this information easily accessible. Here's another. Is it possible to have more than one host for a meeting?
Yes, we have what is we call a co-host, or even an alternative host. So a co-host is someone that you can assign while in the meeting to help you manage the meeting. But you can, even when you send invitations to the meeting, you can identify the person that can help you co-host the meeting. And so it can be done in the invitation level, but also in the meeting level itself.
Thank you. Very popular question. Now, does Zoom provide any individual training or technical assistance for organizations that are now incorporating this platform into everyday use?
We have a lot of information on our website. We actually have a new section for these times that people can go look into videos, read articles, learn about how to set the product in the right way for the use case. So there's a lot of information on our website, zoom.us/support. You'll find it there.
And something that we recommend as well is practice this once or twice in a safe way. So if you know that you're going to be having a meeting, if you know you're going to be having a large church service, if you know that you're going to be having some kind of a large meeting, well, first get your co-host set up ahead of time, set up a couple of meetings and try to have somebody Zoom bomb and kick them out. So do this in a way, just as you practice like a first aid or a fire safety plan, you want to practice your plan for an incident like this.
Thank you, Dave. I think that makes a lot of sense. We're about out of time, and I just want to thank all of you for spending time with us this afternoon. If there's anything anyone else would like to say before we close out, I'm happy to open the floor for a moment. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being with us today. We're thrilled to have you. And again, these resources are going to be sent out later tomorrow. And we'll also be sending you a reminder that we'll be continuing our Fighting Hate from Home series next Thursday at 2:30. And I hope we'll have you back with us then. And until then, please stay healthy, stay safe, wash your hands.